So thank you everyone for being here. Avant de commencer, si vous préférez entendre la discussion en français, vous pouvez cliquer sur le bouton de traduction simultanée. C'est un petit bouton dans le coin bas à droite et sélectionner l'option français. If you wish to hear the discussion only in English, you can click on the small interpretation button at the bottom right corner and select English as your main language. Otherwise, if you don't use a simultaneous interpretation, the discussion is going to be bilingual, so you're going to hear us in speaking in two languages. So we've prepared a short poll just to get to know the attendees. So feel free to answer while I give you some basic information about the webinar. So first of all, I would like to thank you, the RBC Foundation, that has funded this webinar and the other webinars we've offered in the past weeks or in the coming weeks. So actually, if you're interested, we're going to have more events coming, so you can sign up to our newsletters to be informed of when they are up. Like registrations open, they're going to be free as this one. So we are in a webinar mode, so you won't be able to turn your video or microphone on. You can connect with us through the chat. If you have comments or you want to react to something the panelists have said, or you can use the Q&A panel at the bottom left. You can ask your questions. You can also vote for questions other people have asked, and we're going to try to prioritize questions with more votes. And the last 30 minutes will only be devoted for your questions. So do ask whatever questions you come up with. So today we have 3 researchers with us. They have very different approaches. They come from different universities, and they're going to discuss how we can build research projects in dance that create a sustainable and long-lasting impact in the community. So we have Rachel Barr from the Canada National Ballet School. She's also doing her postdoc at the Trent Center for Aging and Society. We have Melissa Park, who is an associate professor at the School of Physical and Occupational Therapy at McGill. And we have Sylvie Fortin, who is just retired from the dance department at the University of Quebec in Montreal, UQAM. And she's now working as a facilitator and researcher in somatic education. So I'll let each of them introduce themselves quickly before we actually start with the discussion, so you can have an idea of what their approach is and what kind of work they do. So, and also you can now see the polls and see who is in the webinar with you. So have a good webinar, everyone. Rachel, if you want to start. Sorry.
Sure, thanks so much, Anna. I was just reviewing who was listening. Thanks for joining in, Anna. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. So a little bit about myself. My first passion was dance, and I was classically trained. I graduated from Canada's National Ballet School and had a career as a professional ballet dancer before I went back to school. And have since focused on research in dance. My focus in research is both on dancers' health, so specifically the mental health of professional dancers and elite athletes, but even more broadly than that, I'm looking at dance for health, which is really, I think, the focus of what we will be discussing today. And if you were to ask why I research, I think I would say that because of my lived experience, I know why dance is so important and how much it can offer to the individual and the community. But I also know and recognize that for people that haven't had that lived experience throughout their life, it is important that we speak in languages that other people understand. And research is a language that is recognized by policymakers, by healthcare professionals, and by certain communities. And so I think it has a really key role in helping to share dance with communities. And I think also as an artist, I am fascinated by research, the transition from professional dancer to academic, felt right for me, because there is a huge component of curiosity and creativity, the same that you have as the artist in the studio. It's different, but there is that, you know, as the researcher, you are asking, you're deciding what questions to ask. And so that creative component, I think, excites me, the artist in me. And so I mentioned specifically what I researched, but a little bit more detail, where my focus really has been in dance for older adults or dance in older adulthood. I focused on this in general, but I've also paid particular attention to dance for people living with Parkinson's in my research, and dance for people living with dementia. And further, my research has also considered dance-based knowledge translation of health research in general. So how dance experiences may actually be one of the best ways to translate this research to the very different stakeholders that we are trying to share dance with. And that also is really, I feel, the main focus of where I think the research needs to go if we're talking about research today. Ultimately, my goal is to get more people dancing. And I feel that, you know, if we are able to share the research that we're doing in accessible ways to the different stakeholders, that is really going to help, you know, move that forward. And I think also, and I know we'll talk more about today, if the research can also be a support for the sustainability of dance, so that when we grow a community of dance, that the research is a way to actually help it sustain itself and further develop and evolve. I think that will be a really exciting direction that sometimes happens, but I think there's more room in that area. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the discussion, but I'll now pass it on, I believe, to Sylvie.
Merci, merci Rachel. Alors, deux phrases en prologue qui ont orienté ma recherche. D'abord, j'ai commencé la danse à 5 ans à cause d'un problème de santé respiratoire. Et j'ai continué pour le plaisir physique et l'expérience artistique. Mais en 1989, lors d'un spectacle en Hollande avec la compagnie Jean-Pierre Perrault, je me suis blessée au dos. Donc, ces deux événements ont beaucoup influencé mes orientations de recherche. Après ma blessure au dos, j'ai conduit plusieurs études quantitatives, mais aussi des recherches qualitatives sur le rapport au corps et à la santé dans le milieu de la danse contemporaine professionnelle. Et pour ça, j'ai utilisé des méthodologies ethnographiques, c'est-à-dire qu'avec mes équipes de recherche, on allait en studio pour observer, puis pour faire des entrevues avec les chorégraphes, avec les danseurs, les répétiteurs. Puis, vers les années 2005, j'ai débuté un autre cycle de recherche différent en m'intéressant à la danse au service de différents problèmes de santé. Donc, je suis revenue en quelque sorte à ce que j'avais vécu enfant. J'ai donc conduit, à partir de 2005, plusieurs recherches utilisant la danse, mais aussi la méthode Feldenkrais d'éducation somatique, avec des enfants, avec des adultes qui souffraient de fibromyalgie, de dépression, de troubles du comportement alimentaire, de maladies neuromusculaires, d'accidents vasculaires cérébrales et même de toxicomanie. J'ai conduit des recherches avec vraiment différentes populations. Et là, probablement que vous êtes en train de vous demander comment est-ce que je peux être un spécialiste de tout ça? Eh bien, je ne suis pas spécialiste de tout ça. Je suis seulement spécialiste du mouvement. Mais il s'avère que, comme spécialiste du mouvement, je sais reconnaître une respiration contrainte. Et j'ai des outils en danse, en éducation somatique pour aider une personne à respirer de façon optimale et que cette personne soit atteinte de fibromyalgie, de dépression ou de sclérose en plaques. Bien, une respiration ample, optimale, bien, ça va lui procurer un sentiment de bien-être. Bon, il va sans dire que j'investigue la condition physique, psychologique ou sociale des personnes avec lesquelles je travaille, j'y reviendrai. Donc, ce que je fais, je dirais mon champ de recherche pourrait être décrit en Europe par le terme « danse pour la santé ». Si vous allez sur Facebook, vous allez pouvoir aller sur un groupe qui s'appelle Dance for Health et ils définissent la danse pour la santé de cette façon. La danse pour la santé propose aux personnes des activités holistiques fondées sur la recherche afin de mieux s'adapter à leurs défis de santé physique, mentale et sociale. Les artistes pédagogues qui dispensent les cours sont formés pour interagir avec les participants en tant que danseurs plutôt que patients dans le cadre d'une pratique artistique interactive et joyeuse. Fin de la définition de ce groupe de recherche. Donc, la danse pour la santé et la danse adaptée qui en fait partie, un terme qu'on utilise ici aujourd'hui, se distinguent de la thérapie, puis je pourrai revenir là-dessus plus tard dans ce webinaire. Donc, sur le plan méthodologique, les recherches conduites avec ces différentes personnes ont surtout pris la forme de recherche-action, c'est-à-dire que j'ai travaillé vraiment main dans la main avec des organismes du début à la fin de la recherche. Les organismes ont été partie prenante de la formulation des objectifs jusqu'à la fin du rapport final, qui, va sans dire, n'a pas été juste un article scientifique publié dans une revue en anglais, mais aussi un rapport de recherche qui servait leur organisme dans la poursuite de leur activité, puis dans la demande de financement de leur activité. Je voudrais préciser ici que je me suis toujours impliquée dans mes recherches à titre de chercheur, mais aussi comme enseignante des cours de danse, parce que j'ai toujours ressenti le besoin de prendre la responsabilité des cours à l'occasion. Parce que pour moi, la danse, ça se vit dans le partage de la sensibilité. Et d'ailleurs, j'en profite pour remercier les personnes avec qui j'ai conduit tous ces projets de recherche. Puis parler du contact sensible, parler de la danse comme un moment de présence sensible à soi et aux autres, ça m'a amené à questionner quelle méthodologie de recherche pouvait le mieux convenir pour révéler ce qui est de l'ordre artistique, expressif, créatif. J'ai donc exploré l'auto-ethnographie et les écritures créatives analytiques parce que c'est des méthodes de recherche qui réussissent à vraiment bien saisir la dimension subjective, phénoménologique du vécu interne, du vécu intime de la personne, mieux que des entrevues ou des focus group qui sont des méthodes typiques de collecte de données, de la recherche qualitative. Donc, l'ethnographie, les écritures créatives, c'est des formes de mise en récit qui valorisent le langage métaphorique, imagé, poétique, pour exprimer comment l'expérience artistique contribue à la santé et au mieux-être des individus. À part ces méthodes, dans la lignée de la recherche-création, il y a évidemment la danse, dans sa forme vivante, présentée devant un public ou filmée, qui donne à voir l'expérience artistique comme un ingrédient de la santé et du mieux-être. La recherche en danse ne doit pas seulement mettre en évidence ce qui se passe objectivement sur le plan physique en utilisant des tests standardisés, des échelles de mesure, des questionnaires avec des statistiques, mais aussi mettre en lumière les changements sur le plan artistique. C'est ce qui a été fait en partie dans le dernier projet de recherche nommé Audace que j'ai dirigé avec Bonnie Swain, directrice de l'École de réadaptation de l'Université de Montréal. Ce projet de recherche a réuni 10 collègues, chercheurs et scientifiques des 4 universités montréalaises de différents domaines. Et nous avons développé ensemble et évalué 6 programmes de danse qui avaient pour but d'améliorer la qualité de vie des personnes avec des défis de santé. Et tous les programmes étaient centrés sur le plaisir de danser, mais aussi sur les besoins particuliers des 6 groupes. Un groupe d'adolescents souffrant de paralysie cérébrale, un groupe d'adultes en réadaptation de déficience physique, des femmes ayant connu l'itinérance, des personnes atteintes de la maladie de Parkinson et aussi, il y avait un groupe qui avait pas, des enfants atteints de problèmes de neurovision, puis un groupe âgé sans problématique particulière. Et là, de nombreuses études, de nombreuses données quantitatives ont été prises auprès de tous ces groupes. Par exemple, il y avait une montre sophistiquée pour mesurer la variabilité de la fréquence cardiaque. Mais il n'y a pas eu seulement des données quantitatives qui ont été collectées, il y a eu des données qualitatives auprès des 6 facilitatrices, professeurs de danse, des entrevues, des enregistrements de leur enseignement. Et à la fin de la recherche, tous les participants des 6 groupes ont été rassemblés au Grand Ballet canadien, qui était notre partenaire de recherche, pour une représentation publique. Et qui a témoigné en fait de l'expérience vécue, de comment on pouvait voir comment l'expérience pouvait contribuer à la santé, au mieux-être de ces personnes. Je terminerai en disant qu'on a planifié dès le début cette représentation publique inclusive, parce que la documentation visuelle pour montrer l'expérience artistique et sensible était importante pour nous. Puis on a été comblés parce que la Fabrique culturelle en a fait un film documentaire qui est accessible sur son site web et qui est assez révélateur de l'expérience. Alors, je vais terminer par une phrase pour le futur. Qu'est-ce qui me tient à cœur pour le futur? Eh bien, c'est d'implanter la danse, un peu comme disait Rachel, que tout le monde danse. Implanter la danse dans les milieux traditionnels de la santé, implanter la danse dans les milieux communautaires, dans les studios de danse, et que ce soit prescrit par les médecins, les psychologues, les travailleurs sociaux, et que ce soit couvert par les compagnies d'assurance. J'aimerais vraiment qu'on développe ici des prescriptions de danse, qu'en Angleterre, ils appellent des prescriptions sociales, parce que je trouve que la danse a un potentiel vraiment sous-estimé. Et il faut changer la perception de la danse, qui est comme une perception d'activité pour l'élite. Il faut que les gens vraiment réalisent tout le potentiel de la danse et que ce soit accessible au plus grand nombre. Alors, à mon tour de passer la parole à Mélissa.
Thank you, Sylvie. That was beautiful, and thank you, Rachel. Also, I really have a hard time with webinars because I can't see all of you. So you're welcome to use the chat whenever I'm speaking, so at least I feel that you're out there. I have it open, but I wanted to really take the time just for a moment to thank again Anna and Rachel and Sylvie for this journey, because when I was invited in by Anna to partake in this panel, I was quite puzzled because, and I until this morning actually, and up last night, thinking I don't understand how am I supposed to talk about dance, because there's these 2 experts that have this embodied knowledge of dance and then have developed amazing research skills to kind of complement that and bring this wealth of different perspectives. So in talking, I'll try and keep this short, but I tend to talk in stories. To a colleague of mine, she kind of emphasized, well, where did you begin? She wanted me to get me to kind of really think about it. And in that process, I think for all of you, when I'm speaking about dance, I'm really going to be talking to you about movement, or what I have learned to call bodily sensing. And in some ways, I often will refer to dance as a metaphor, and a metaphor that works as an embodied metaphor of what we do with others, but also what we can do within society. So why I research, I actually started, I have a very haphazard journey. I am trained as an occupational therapist, and I was working, and I was also have a background in screenwriting and art history. So I kind of decided that it was time to, we all decided it was time for me to stop waiting tables and to get serious. So I actually used my occupational therapy degree, and I was working with young children that were nonverbal, who had autism, and a sensory integration clinic. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but it's a framework that really trains us to kind of sense the environment and all of the things going on in the environment, and then to kind of think about how our movement is related to our health and our well-being and others. And I didn't bother to read, this was when autism estates me, but I didn't bother to read the diagnosis on autism and asociality and all of this. I just went and was trying to play with them. And we started to create stories. And in that, there were these moments that all of you, I noticed that there's quite a few health facilitators in the audience and also dance facilitators. But there's often that moment when we go, we just know something happened and we don't know what that is, but we know it's important. And when they asked if I would, the children that I was working with made tremendous changes in sociality. And so I was asked to start a social skills group. And I've lived in different contexts and I thought, well, I am definitely not the person to teach social skills because they change everywhere you go. And I'm quite shy and I just didn't think that was going to make it. So I actually returned to graduate school. And what I wanted to understand was what was that thing that happened in that interaction where you feel that transformative moment and you suddenly feel a burst of energy and whatever you're doing in that hour. So I was really interested in understanding process. And at that time, they were calling it that active ingredient. So I went back to school and I started to do an ethnography of these children in the sensory integration clinic, working with occupational therapists using this movement technique. And then I'll tell you the story that really got me to think about movement more as dance. And it was a young child that would become, I'm going to make fun of it. I'm not very good at this. I'm not a dancer, but he would become a twister and he would move, he would just run, he would rotate around the clinic and it was very fun for him to do. And he'd have the sound woo when he would be the twister. And I went to his home after he had been discharged and was looking at all the changes that had been happening. We also filmed the sessions. I went to his home and we were interviewing the mother and the two children saw it. He was 5 years old, his daughter was littler. And I said, would you like to use my recorder? And so of course they did. And the little girl wanted to do Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So she took the recorder and she sang Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and she was done. And we asked, would you like to try something too? To the young boy, he took the recorder and he immediately said, is it on? Is it on? His language was not super great. So we made sure it was on. He made sure it was facing him and then he spun around his house in that twister motion. And he finished and he was making, oh, so that's all you hear on the recorder. And then he bumped up against me and he said, that's good. You try it. And I traced that movement back through the clinic process before that. And I found this movement was associated both with these moments where he was the conflict, which was a twister. He got really upset at the therapist, so he's throwing Beanie Babies around as a twister. And then at another moment where he's then holding up a wand to soothe the baby who was crying. So he's holding up the wand. So you notice the similar movement. And then I started to read a little bit about, so Sylvie's mentioned all these trajectories, a little bit about phenomenology and the phenomenology of movement in space. By Morris. And he talks about how this movement, right, is related to experiences of care and expanding aspects of care. So I really started to think with this young child of five, what does that mean? This movement, bodily sensing, and not only our healing of our own his sense of groundedness and weight and power, where he was kind of marginalized before, he kind of took on this force. But also, what does it have to do with our ability to connect to other people? So this has been my journey. And so what I research is I really research the in-between. I've been teased by my anthropology colleagues that I'm in pursuit of the ephemeral. So I'm always interested in what emerges in between people. And so when I came here, I had another one of I would call him my mentor, Kevin Lee, who he signed me up as his supervisor, but I couldn't quite understand why, because he was a dancer. And he's the one who's also brought me into this world of dance. And he wanted to understand also why changes were happening. So he's developed a program called Moving With, and I've been able to accompany him on this journey and learn different ways of thinking about movement and learning a vocabulary of movement that I didn't have before, from this kind of dance perspective. As part of that journey to kind of try and find a home for the work that he's doing, I met people at the NCDT, National Center for Dance Therapy, at that time Christian, and then Anna. And so I've also been trying to partner with them to work with them to kind of think through with everyone, what is this thing, this movement, how does it connect people? So what that's taken me is at first it was a very small project where, well, it was an exploratory project. We did looking at, we partnered with an engineer and we looked at, I was also still constantly thinking about what do dancers face? How do we capture that ephemeral, that thing that you all know works when you're in those interactions? So, and we need these measures. So I partnered with an engineer who was developing something called biomusic. Her name is Dr. Stephanie Blaine-Moraes. You may have heard of her. And I also partnered with her because I wanted to see if we could have a measure that would help us also understand those moments as significant experiences. And so she has this biomusic that I really was interested in looking at it. Could it also measure physiological events that are equivalent to those significant events that we remember as transformative, as really engaging where something happens? And then from there, we partnered again with Stephanie to look and work with moving from autism to dementia. And so my trajectory with the National Center for Dance Therapy as my partner has been to move from that. In our last project, we've really been expanding slowly. So we moved in Kevin's work, he's really working and looking at that dyadic interaction that goes on, what's happening when people move together and the process and how that then transcends that context and moves into their homes and into their everyday lives. And he's somebody definitely that he can talk to you more about that process. And then I was really interested in, could we think about how this works at a community level? And so we then submitted for this current grant that we have, and it's called What Connects Us. So literally now looking at what are these things that connect us? And then again, working with Anna to see how shared activities such as dance not only also connect the participants in some way and form, but can it also connect different agencies within the community so that we can form networks? And that then through, so really starting to think about movement, bodily sensing, and this language that all of you have around dance that's embodied. And then really thinking with that about how many levels that we can work with movement as healing and transformative, both at the individual level, you know, the dyadic, and also at the level of communities. And right now I see that if we think about where does it need to go, and we think about our current context where there's a lot of divisions, then I think that right now this is one of the most beautiful and most primary ways that we can forge connections across these differences. So, you know, I'm really happy to have met Rachel and Sylvie and see the work that they're doing, and that there are, you know, community groups like the Grand Ballet that are interested in how do we forward this type of, you know, I guess we could call it social sustainability. There was one more thing that I wanted to add, and that's, I guess I'm speaking to the audience even though I can't see you, which is, you know, I kind of feel like I have a backward process to Rachel and Sylvie. I can see your faces. So I started in rehab, right? And then like ending up at dance, where you started as dancers and really expanding. And one of the things that for me that's been really important is to work with all of you, because there is the other thing that I really think that research needs to go is to, again, ephemeral, right? Is to your own experiential knowledge. And I can see Rachel nodding, you know, and how do we find a language to bring that experiential knowledge out to others, right? And to really use that to help us think about connectivity to oneself and to others and for our communities. So I guess that's that underground practice is how do we work together to make those more visible, where I think things need to go, and really looking at social connectivity on a political level too. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Melissa. It was extremely interesting. And merci aussi à Sylvie. Thank you, Rachel, for your presentation. Before we dig into the discussion, I just want to add something. Like I'm working now with Melissa for the What Connects Us project, and like she really is like the most motivated person, and like we have lived through so many small connection moments, and it's been incredible. And like well, I've also worked with Sylvie and like a few other people I see in the audience on their DAS project, and then again like the community event we had at the end, I think like everyone there was moved. And like while I haven't worked with Rachel, like yeah, I just want to say to the audience, like go look for the projects like they've been working on, because like everything, like they're all incredible. So yeah, so I guess just so you know, we've like identified 3 main themes we're gonna discuss today. They're all interconnected. We're gonna start with methodology and methodologies and different options we have, and then we're gonna move to sustainability and what it means to create a project that's like sustainable and like has a long-lasting impact in the community. And then, because this at the end, it's about community, we're gonna discuss who the community is. So who are the stakeholders, who are all the people involved in a project. And when I say we, it's actually like Sylvie, Melissa, and Rachel. And so I'm gonna, I'm gonna let Sylvie start with just giving us an idea like methodology and like what are different methodology approaches we can use. What are some of the trends you've observed? And then let Melissa and Rachel please jump in and add your comments.
OK, donc la question, c'est sur les méthodologies. Bien, j'ai parlé un tout petit peu tout à l'heure qu'il y a les méthodologies quantitatives. Hein, les méthodologies quantitatives, c'est pour contrôler, c'est pour expliquer des phénomènes. Tandis que la méthode qualitative, c'est plus pour comprendre, pour décrire des phénomènes. J'ai aussi parlé de la recherche-création, qui est là pour saisir l'insaisissable des expériences artistiques. Donc, ces 3 types de recherche, pour moi, idéalement, doivent se combiner. Parce que si un chercheur fait seulement un sondage quantitatif, il va obtenir des résultats chiffrés. Mais s'il ajoute des entrevues avec les personnes, il va pouvoir expliquer ces chiffres. Et si on ajoute une mise en forme chorégraphique du vécu des personnes concernées, on va obtenir une autre compréhension. Par exemple, si on met une mise en scène, si on fait une représentation publique de l'expérience du cancer du sein avec des jeunes femmes ou des femmes gays plus âgées, je prends des exemples comme ça, des femmes qui s'affilient à la communauté LGBTQ, bien, ça va être un rapport à l'esthétique probablement très différent. Et le rapport à l'esthétique, ça fait partie d'une dimension, c'est une dimension de nos vies. Et ça permet la mise en mouvement, ça peut permettre de dépasser de certaines étapes dans notre vécu par rapport à différentes situations. Mais je pense que les méthodes... Mélissa en a un petit peu parlé. Je trouve que la recherche, c'est toujours idéologique. Du moment où tu fais le choix d'un thème de recherche, jusqu'au moment où tu choisis ta méthode, jusqu'au moment même le financement, d'où vient le financement, c'est très idéologique. Et les raisons pour s'impliquer en recherche sont différentes selon qu'on est facilitateur, qu'on est chercheur ou directeur d'un lieu de pratique, politicien. Parce que pour moi, ces personnes-là font partie du portrait général de la recherche. Si on est facilitateur, que l'on ait une formation en amont, une formation d'artiste, de danse thérapeute ou de professionnel de la santé, bien, ce qu'on veut que la recherche nous apporte, c'est vraiment une amélioration de notre pratique. Hein? Puis idéalement, en se basant sur des données probantes qui vont faire qu'on va sortir des façons de faire habituelles. On va arrêter d'imiter ce qu'on a vu dans notre vie passée. Donc, la recherche, pour moi, là, ça sert d'abord, pour les professeurs, ça sert d'abord la pratique d'enseignement. On peut aller chercher toutes sortes d'informations. Bon, j'ai dit que j'ai travaillé avec des enfants qui souffrent de paralysie cérébrale. Bien, sur le plan physique, la recherche nous disait quel type de mouvement prescrire parce qu'ils ont des contractions musculaires atypiques. J'ai travaillé, je vous ai dit que j'ai travaillé avec des femmes de la rue. Bien, la recherche sur le plan psychologique peut nous donner vraiment des stratégies pour éviter les crises d'anxiété. Sur le plan pédagogique, il y a de la recherche en pédagogie qui peut nous aider comme professeur de danse. Il y a beaucoup de recherche sur l'inclusion. Mais sur le plan artistique aussi, hein, aller voir comment on peut susciter l'imaginaire, puis même avoir une progression dans la capacité d'aller dans l'imaginaire avec les personnes avec lesquelles on travaille. Mais si on est chercheur, la motivation va être complètement différente. Et là, moi, je trouve que les chercheurs, ils ont comme deux voies. Il y a des chercheurs qui vont s'intéresser aux résultats de la recherche sur le plan physique ou psychologique, c'est-à-dire qu'ils vont aller voir, est-ce que la danse améliore l'équilibre? Est-ce que la danse diminue l'anxiété? Est-ce que la danse affecte la participation sociale? Ça, c'est s'intéresser aux résultats de la danse. Mais comme chercheur, on peut aussi s'intéresser au processus, ce que dans notre équipe de recherche audace, on a appelé la boîte noire. C'est-à-dire qu'on veut identifier, Mélissa en a parlé tout à l'heure, on veut identifier les ingrédients actifs qui entrent en jeu et qui expliquent en partie les résultats. Est-ce qu'on a des résultats parce qu'on danse 2 par 2? Est-ce qu'on a, c'est le fait qu'on danse 2 par 2 qui explique l'amélioration de l'équilibre, ou est-ce que c'est la musique qui fait une différence, une musique qui est planifiée avec un tempo plus lent puis plus vite? Lucie Baudry a beaucoup aussi investigué la boîte noire dans le cadre de son doctorat, et elle a particulièrement porter attention à décrire ce qui se fait dans la boîte noire, parce que c'est très important et c'est une faiblesse de la recherche présentement. On décrit des résultats sur le plan quantitatif, mais on ne peut pas expliquer dans le cours de danse qu'est-ce qui a été fait. C'est un petit peu comme si on prenait une pilule, puis on avait un effet, mais on ne saurait pas qu'est-ce qu'il y a dans la pilule qui cause tel ou tel effet. Donc, comme chercheur, on peut s'intéresser on peut aussi, comme je disais, s'intéresser à un aspect plus artistique. Mélissa a parlé de l'importance de créer des liens, d'être connecté. On le vit beaucoup ces temps-ci. Il y a quelques années, on entendait beaucoup l'importance de trouver un sens à sa vie. Mais c'est tout aussi important de se sentir en vie, de se sentir connecté. Au moment où je vous parle, j'ai un petit laptop et je suis face à une rivière, des arbres. Se sentir connecté avec le monde végétal, animal, humain, ça fait partie d'une expérience qui peut faire partie, qui peut être transmise, communiquée, comme je disais, par une écriture poétique ou la mise en danse de ces états-là. Et finalement, bien, il y a les décideurs. Mélissa a parlé et je renchéris, la danse est toujours politique et les politiciens ont besoin de données probantes, ont besoin de films, ont besoin de démonstrations artistiques, mais ils ont besoin de données probantes, quantitatives pour injecter des fonds publics qui vont permettre, comme disait Rachel, à tout le monde de danser. Et je vais terminer en disant qu'il n'y a quand même pas seulement la recherche scientifique comme forme de savoir. Hein. Toutes les Premières Nations, toutes les cultures autochtones du monde ont attribué des bienfaits guérisseurs à la danse. Mais aujourd'hui, on a besoin de données probantes, de données quantitatives pour arriver un jour, je l'espère, comme je disais, à ce que les médecins, les psychologues, les travailleurs sociaux prescrivent de la danse à leurs patients, comme il se fait dans d'autres pays. Voilà. Il y a à ce sujet-là, ben, pas à ce sujet-là, mais il y a Andrew Greenwood en Hollande, je crois, qui fait des études passionnantes sur le retour d'investissement, comment, quand on injecte de l'argent dans la danse, comment c'est payant pour la société. On pourra en discuter plus tard. Je laisse la parole à mes collègues Rachel ou Mélissa.
Maybe I'll jump in next. Sylvie really captures sort of the crux of the considerations that you need to make in methodology when you're trying to understand dance. I know for me, I was trained initially as a quantitative researcher, and I know reading papers about the benefits of dance for a said population and the quantitative measures, I guess great to see positive outcomes, but feeling like but you're missing why these people come to dance and participate in this. And knowing, you know, with the group I work with living with Parkinson's, that yes, their balance was improving and their posture was better, and you know, it was their mood was enhanced, but the joy was maybe the hardest thing to capture in the research, and so starting in the quantitative, then you're moving to the qualitative to see how much more of that you can capture. And so I do think that that is why it's important to have quite a diverse toolkit when you're trying to study dance, because like you were saying, Sylvie, depending on the stakeholder that you're trying to inform, you need to be offering different information. But I would say that for me, what in my research, what I've come to understand is that the best way to understand the research is actually to experience it. And so it's why I invite neurologists to come to the Dance for Parkinson's class, or invite the policymakers to come and dance with their communities, because in my experience, that has somehow allowed the penny to drop for things to make sense in a way that doesn't matter how many papers you publish or presentations you give. Nothing that in my experience has replaced the experience. And so as important as, you know, the publications are for accountability and integrity in what we claim, what we say, ultimately, I have found that the best way to translate the research is through experience. So when I am approaching research, I am considering, what do I want to know? What do I want to understand about whatever the experience is? And I won't judge and be either this type of researcher or that type of researcher. Of course, I don't have expertise in all approaches, so I'll want to work with different expertise, but really trying to answer whatever question is being asked, I think is relevant. And then in addition, using every opportunity possible to encourage from the beginning the stakeholders to experience it for themselves. And so even, you know, when I've gone into a long-term care facility to lead a dance program, it's anyone, you know, from the cleaner in the, you know, walking down the hallway to come and join in and experience. I think that together we're understanding why it's so it's such a gift to have the opportunity to dance. So that's my take on methodology, which I think is really aligned with what you're saying, Sylvie, is that there are different ways really to understand what dance is and what it has to offer. Melissa, I'll pass it to you.
Okay. I guess that's a really... Oh, Sylvie, you have a comment.
J'ajouterai quelque chose après toi, Melissa.
Oh, you can add now.
Non, c'est OK, d'accord. C'est qu'en écoutant Rachel, c'est comme il faut travailler très fort en recherche pour, comme tu disais, Rachel, aller sur le plan expérientiel, faire vivre la danse à tout le monde, les politiciens, les médecins, les compagnies d'assurance y compris. Mais en même temps, on sait que ça prend, à l'autre extrême, ça prend des études d'essais randomisés contrôlés. C'est-à-dire des études avec un groupe qui fait de la danse, il y a une intervention, il y a un groupe qui ne fait pas de danse, puis un groupe qui fait autre chose. Parce que c'est ce type d'étude qui vient en haut de la pyramide de la validité scientifique, et les décideurs en ont besoin. Et on a besoin de convaincre les gens, autant par l'expérientiel que par la recherche qui est vraiment la plus valorisée sur le plan scientifique. Et tu travailles en Parkinson, Rachel. Maintenant, il y a 2 ans, il y a Anne-Violetta Brunel qui a fait une étude, qui a sélectionné vraiment là, toutes les études irréprochables sur le plan méthodologique en Parkinson. Elle a relevé 16 études randomisées contrôlées. C'est quand même beaucoup d'études. Le Parkinson, c'est la maladie la plus étudiée en recherche. Puis dans ces 12 études-là, il y en a 11 qui ont démontré un effet positif sur la danse. Ça nous donne des arguments très forts pour convaincre les politiciens, mais en même temps, on les invite à voir un spectacle de danse et à rester pour le party après la danse pour faire l'expérience de la danse ou un atelier, je veux dire. Donc, on commence à avoir des résultats, puis on commence même dans certaines formes, comme le Parkinson, à regarder les ingrédients actifs. Comme avec le Parkinson, il y a des chercheurs comme Glenna Batson qui ont proposé de la danse improvisée pour mesurer, supposons, l'équilibre. D'autres chercheurs, comme Madeleine Acné, ils ont utilisé des formes de danse très structurées comme le tango. Ici, il faut mentionner Patricia McKinley qui, dès les années 80, a recherché là, les impacts de la danse. Donc, en t'écoutant, Rachel, c'est comme il faut travailler sur tellement de plans différents. Voilà. À toi, Mélissa, je te redonne la balle.
Anna, are we good on time for me to add a little bit with methodology?
I'm sorry, I forgot I was muted, but yeah, go with it, and then we're going to move to talking about like, sustainability.
Okay, because we've kind of foreshadowed too. I really love this conversation and this kind of the discussion about methodology. I agree with both of you, and I really love how, Sylvie, you kind of set the framing, as you put it well, Rachel, between, you know, the different paradigms that you can hear Sylvie talking about, you know, to explain or positivist, and then to understand and interpretive. It was a really beautiful way that, and you also have lots of examples. And Rachel, I have to say that I've really been trained in the experience model. And I think it is because of this desire to engage persons. I've come to that. I think the only thing that I might want to add to this conversation, just for some of you that are considering your own trajectories in research, is that also when we work with qualitative research, and especially also when we work with mixed methods research, that means when you have methods that are coming from different paradigms. So both for the accounting, you can hear that language, and then for the description or the understanding or the interpretation, we are mixing methods, and it's often difficult to keep them complementary. So one of the tricks that you can do is to use a conceptual framework. And the conceptual framework that I've been using consistently is called narrative phenomenology. And it wasn't created by me, it was created by my mentors who worked in anthropology for many years. And it's actually evolved to such a degree that it's become kind of a critical phenomenological lens. And what this means is you go so deeply into human experience that we begin to actually question the language by which we explain things. So we're questioning the explanatory value that maybe biomedicine uses in terms of describing what are the health benefits of dance, but start to kind of think about how do people experience movement, and then how can we use that knowledge? So I'm looking at you, kind of the dancers, you have all this experiential embodied knowledge about what movement does. And so if I was to use this framework for you, for example, it would be to really ask you about your experiences in movement in all kinds of ways, but not about movement. I would ask you about things that stand out. So this framework asks is one, it's person-centered. So I would go to you and I'd ask for a first-person perspective as opposed to a third-person perspective. So it's what I feel or we feel. So what you would experience, and I would try and get you to tell me stories about that, as opposed to a third-person perspective, which is kind of when we take a more objective or a meta-level view. It's also a framework that says person-centered, first-person perspective, but from a multiple perspective viewpoint. So I want to bring as many people I can into the conversation to understand what movement is doing when it's enacted and embodied. I think the reason I wanted to bring that up is because I think it would be really nice if I was to continue from the tail end of before, is to work with dancers to also understand this language. As Sylvie, I think you had mentioned to this, you deferred to it, and also Rachel, that you need to find a word for it or a language for it that may help us also to excavate vocabulary that is missing from what we could see as positive benefits, right? In a first person kind of way. And the advantage of that first person language, and I think you're hinting at, you're actually not hinting, you're talking a lot about this, Rachel, is it's the thing that convinces the other, right? It's the stories that move us.
Maybe.
I guess.
I think we lost you for a moment, but you're back. So.
Okay. And then another angle of this thing is that the people that work with this narrative phenomenological method, when they say narrative, it's not just told narratives, it's also narratives that are enacted. So I think that dancers have such an innate knowledge about how gesture and movement with others is the creation of a story, right? Is additive. When you know, if you improvise, it's a yes and in movement, right? And if you don't do it, the dance ends, the story ends. My sister also has taught me a lot. She's a social tango dancer, so she can talk to me endlessly about all of the interactions on a dance floor. So I guess I would just add that there's also this little thing that we can use, that no matter what methodologies that we choose, we can use these conceptual frameworks that would maybe benefit dance in such a way to bring that underground knowledge out. I do also partner with someone who does social network analysis to bring me that numbers. So those of you interested in social network analysis, it's really a methodology to look at connectivity, but from a numerical mathematical point of view. And what I've learned, which is really interesting about social network researchers, is that they actually need empirical evidence. And by empirical, I mean observations. So they need all those observations that, you know, people that aren't dancers don't experience what you experience when you move, or your toes are, how you feel grounded in the metaphor, right? What it means to reach out for somebody. Dancers understand that in a way that other people do not. So this kind of language would actually feed people that work on social network analysis, because they develop mathematical equations to look at things like reach, actually, and bridging, so connectors. So these are kind of interesting ways that you can maybe think about how do you use your expertise and work, find other researchers who are good partners, maybe. Hope that's useful.
Thank you very much, Melissa and Rachel and Sylvie. It was, I think, extremely interesting. I think we could go on like talk for the whole night about it. But like there was this word that came out a lot when we started discussing the themes of the panel. It was sustainability, and like what it means to create a sustainable research project. So I think we can, if you can move on to that. And Rachel, if you want to start, I think it was you actually who brought up that word first. So
sure, yeah, and this is something really important to me in terms of being involved in dance research, is that through my experience, I've seen times where a wonderful research initiative has even been funded to get something going, a dance initiative in a community, and the research is funding it to you know, set it up, bring in the instructor, bring the community together, and it goes very well. And you also, through the research, you learn that the people involved are benefiting from it in some way. And this is, I should say, isn't unique to dance. This happens in all sorts of when innovations or interventions are introduced to a community through research. But what happens quite often is that when the research is done, the innovation is done, the intervention is done, and that community is left, while they open their doors to allow you to experiment, to explore, to develop something wonderful, is then left to either without the initiative or to figure out on their own how to sustain it, because you've run out of funding dollars. So what I'm proposing and what I have begun to do with my research is that as I am entering a community as a researcher with research questions and hopefully with a bag of funding cash to support something getting started, is that I'm going in with the intention to leave the community better off than when I arrived. And so that if this works, if this proves to be a valuable contribution to this community, then when I leave, I want it to stay. So from the beginning, as you need to partner wherever you're running your study, it might be in a studio or a community center or a long-term care facility, or wherever you are going into research, is taking the time when you're speaking to those community stakeholders to say, and what would it look like? What would need to happen for this to be sustained? And what I have found is when I've had open and frank conversations with community stakeholders, that they have actually found ways to keep it going. If you're honest, like the research is gonna, I have 2 years to do this, and after that, how are we going to keep this going for this community? And the research can help because, for example, supporting a community in writing their own grant so that they can get funding to hold this program every week in their community center, that stuff can work, but they often need your help. And the fact that you're finding these great benefits for the community can help to support those types of grants. So I think this is very critical, because while it seems on the one hand intuitive, often as a researcher, it's been my experience as well that I'm so focused on the research that I forget it's happened. You need to remember, why are you doing this if ultimately it is to reach communities through dance? Is that is from the beginning how you approach these communities. So I'll pause there and I'll pass it to Sylvie and Melissa to hear about their experiences with this type of approach.
Melissa?
Sorry, I'm distracted by my four-footed friend.
I'll go.
You're stepping all over my keyboards.
I can keep going because it's exactly what I did specifically with three actions. Je suis en anglais, excusez-moi. C'est exactement ce que j'ai fait avec les recherches-actions que j'ai conduites. Tout particulièrement avec l'association Anorexie-Boulimie Québec, avec l'association de fibromyalgie de la région de Montérégie et avec la maison Les Oitiers qui regroupe des femmes qui ont connu l'itinérance. C'est que du début, même les objectifs, je vais vous donner l'exemple du pavillon Les Oitiers, on ne savait pas quelle sorte de danse on offrirait. En fait, nous, on était ouvertes à faire de la création avec elle, tout ça. Mais la direction nous a clairement dit, on veut que ce soit on ne veut pas que ce soit une danse contemporaine qui est trop intériorisée, qui est trop sombre. Les femmes ont besoin de se reconnecter avec... sortir de leur rumination négative de par leur vie très, très difficile et se projeter dans un avenir. Donc, on n'a pas fait du Zumba, on n'a pas éliminé le contact émotif profond avec les femmes, mais on ne l'a pas provoqué. On n'a pas fait une chorégraphie sur la difficulté d'être femme sans abri à Montréal. On n'a pas été dans ce sens-là. Et ça, c'est toutes sortes d'exemples, de décisions qu'on a prises du début à la fin parce qu'on travaille main dans la main, main dans la main. Dans d'autres projets, ça a toujours été comme ça, dans les projets de recherche-action. Mais si j'ai un conseil à donner, oui, on travaille avec l'organisme en question, mais pas juste avec une personne dans l'organisme. Parce que si la personne de l'organisme quitte pour un autre emploi, bien c'est comme le jeu de l'échelle et des serpents. Tu recommences à zéro, il faut faut convaincre de nouveau le personnel, la direction de l'organisme, des avantages les avantages à faire de la danse. Donc, et la difficulté, en tout cas, nous, dans un de nos projets, on a même été on a cherché les subventions pour la pérennité du projet avec l'organisme même. On a fait des demandes, on les a aidés à faire des demandes de subventions. Mais pour ce qui est sur le plan de la qualité, tous les endroits où j'ai été avec la recherche, tous les organismes ont voulu continuer. Tous les organismes ont voulu continuer. Donc, ça parle beaucoup de l'impact. Mélissa? On ne t'entend pas.
Thank you. I actually am it's quite interesting because here we all coincide very much. When I thought about sustainability, to me, it's connected to our methodologies. And I heard you say that very much, both of you, in terms of participatory. So the methodology I use, narrative phenomenology, as my conceptual framework. The actual methodologies I use at the center are participatory. And this is because that's the experience that I want to create, if this makes sense. So I'm going to give you a little bit of, so some of you might like this, but the root of experience, and this isn't my idea, this is Cheryl Mattingly's idea. She wrote a book called Moral Laboratories. And what she was really trying to underline is the root of experience to create a significant experience is also the same root as the word experiment. And so I often conduct my participatory projects as an experiment, as trying to create an experience. And then when I think about sustainability, the idea is to find as many multiple perspectives, you hear that framework coming back in, that I can engage in that process with me. So the language of participatory research comes from a feminist background and critical theory. And it was really to work with people to become co-researchers. So for example, you dancers would become my co-researchers. And then we would work together to identify common concerns and then create action. So Sylvie, this is what she was doing when she talks about those action research problems. In that process, I have one example of sustainability, and what it helped me think it through is that, you know, I always thought the sustainability was about the relationships, because, you know, when you lose a relationship in a community or a community partner, you have to start all over again. But one of the things that has been really interesting for me to follow is I did a community-based participatory research project in a department of psychiatry, and in that setting, and they wanted activities, so, you know, we're thinking about things like dance. What we had is we worked together and we told stories about our experiences. There were psychiatrists, nurses, social workers, occupational therapists, and persons with lived experience of mental illness gathering every month to meet and tell about their experiences. Together, we came up with what were the common concerns that we were able to see that crossed the different, you know, disciplines, across the different hierarchies. You can think who's in top in that picture, and also different experiences, whether you provided care or you received care. They had ideas of what they wanted to create as actions. This was happening in the CUs during the time that recovery-oriented care. So those of you who know mental health policy, we also brought in policymakers onto the grant also. And what happened is that there was a complete reorganization, look at Sylvie, of the whole healthcare system also during the same time. Everybody that we had worked with on this project retired, moved, or were placed in a different department. Those activities that they created are still living on, and they were taken up by the infrastructure of the department itself. So they're now paid for through the department. And so to me, that was a really important lesson, that even if my relationships, the original relationships disappeared or changed, what happened is that there was this common concern that was identified through people's knowledge of the system, in the local system. And so they were identifying very real concerns, and it was shared. So then the solution that they provided, which was also shared, was a good one. So it remained in place. So I don't know if that's useful, but that's how I've started to think about sustainability and what we're now kind of running an experiment with on a larger scale, seeing if something like that can happen when we're trying to link different community agencies in different sectors, because I've been really concerned about, I guess, what we commonly call silos. So there's the arts and culture, there's, and you've mentioned this also, what you're in your description, Sylvie, that you're involving, you know, there's policymakers, there's the academics, there's the healthcare people, and they can often start to get really siloed. So we're running a kind of an experiment. Can dance actually help create connections across those silos for the sustainability? And for people then, so once the grant disappears, if those relationships are in place and they're answering real concerns, then we're effective in the sense. So I'll place these participatory experiments, I guess you could call it that, where we're working with the local knowledge, like people who really know a situation. And then we wrap the ethnography and the social networks analysis around it to kind of see if we can capture that process and context. So I think that sustainability, though, for me, I guess I would return to, you know, really all of the stakeholders that you can think of. And because there are these shared concerns. So, yeah. So adding to I think Rachel and Sylvie. You know, if I could, Anna, because I know that you're cognizant of time, I guess I could just start off that I think I was supposed to introduce the thing about stakeholders, right? And so I think I just did it. So I can return it to Rachel and Sylvie also to add about stakeholders and what you found in your research that I may not have seen. I think what I've been missing are dancers, and that's why I keep talking to all of the dancers out there. Come, give me your experiential knowledge.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Yeah, actually, we only have 20 minutes, and I want to leave some time for the questions from the public. But yeah, Rachel and Sylvie, if you want to, like, I think Melissa did like this perfectly smooth transition from like sustainability to stakeholders. If you want to add like your opinions and thoughts about it, and I guess also we had like this question we discussed, like what can dance facilitators how can they use research? How can they how can they make sure like it has an impact in the work? And so I'll let the stage to you again.
I think for the stakeholders, like, again, it depends which stakeholder you're targeting, or I like, Melissa, this idea to target them all together is quite interesting as well, where you know, I've done that, where, you know, brought all different, you know, had like a minister from the government come, and healthcare professionals and dancers coming together and interacting, and it's been really interesting to watch. The challenge there is to speak a language that everybody understands, because everybody's coming from their own, you know, knowledge and experience. But there is something quite exciting about that, where, you know, you, again, in a way, you kind of feel part of a community. I think that, you know, for policymakers to really understand and to meet the people that are benefiting from these, that it can be quite powerful, similar to healthcare professionals, you know, actually, you know, seeing their patient outside of the clinic in you know, expressing themselves artistically, it can be quite, or you know, somebody who works with somebody living with dementia and realizing, I didn't know they could move like that. I didn't know they had the capacity to express that. These can be really special opportunities. So I think this idea of de-siloing and really thinking of how dance can bring people together is quite a profound one when we are talking about the different stakeholders. But of course, being mindful of the different language, you know, going back to the beginning, you know, we're talking about methodology and why it is important that we're doing the research, because everybody will has there is a value for different stakeholders about a hierarchy of knowledge, of ways of knowing. And so, understanding those and respecting those, I think is important if you're trying to get your message across.
Je pourrais ajouter un mot? Anna?
Sorry, I keep forgetting I'm muted, but go for it.
En fait, moi, je trouve que dans ce qu'on appelle en anglais stakeholders, les parties prenantes, je trouve que du côté des facilitateurs, que ce soit les professeurs de danse, les professionnels de la santé, les danse-thérapeutes, les professeurs de yoga, les kinésiologues, il y a vraiment une volonté, un désir d'aller enseigner la danse à toutes sortes de populations. Du côté des chercheurs, je vois vraiment aussi un intérêt. Je trouve que le groupe avec lequel on doit travailler et avec lequel on doit mettre l'effort, c'est les décideurs. Les décideurs, les directeurs d'organismes, les politiciens. Et les décideurs, pour les convaincre, ça prend, comme je disais, des expériences, des savoirs expérientiels, mais ça prend aussi des données probantes et ça prend des chiffres. Ils fonctionnent avec des rapports financiers qui disent que, bon, avec la danse, on va demeurer à la maison plus longtemps, on va sauver de l'argent à l'État, ça va briser l'isolement des personnes, la longévité va être augmentée. Vous savez, des arguments comme ça, mais avec des chiffres. Et il y a des personnes en Europe qui ont vraiment commencé à faire des études sur, et même à New York, David Leventhal, qui travaille en Parkinson, faisait une présentation récemment, puis il disait que dans l'État de New York, les soins médicaux pour une personne qui souffre de la maladie de Parkinson, c'est 12 800 $ par année. Mais offrir un cours de danse hebdomadaire à un groupe d'une quarantaine de personnes, ça coûte 8 000 $ par année. Donc, ça veut dire que on estime que ça demande 200 $ d'investissement par personne plutôt que 12 800. C'est des arguments comme ça il faut que les décideurs, les organismes réalisent le retour sur investissement qui est fantastique. Mais mesurer tout ça, c'est pas facile. Comme je mentionnais tout à l'heure, il y a Andrew Greenwood, je pense, en Hollande, qui fait ça. J'avais écouté une de ses présentations. Et moi, je trouve que c'est là qu'il faut mettre notre énergie en termes de stakeholders. Ça ne veut pas dire de délaisser les autres, mais c'est un groupe sur lequel il faut vraiment... Moi, j'invite notre intelligence collective à faire des groupes de réflexion, à avoir un lobbying pour briser la perception de la danse comme une activité de luxe pour l'élite, mais puis de remplacer cette perception par la danse, c'est une nécessité pour tout le monde. Puis je me souviens une fois, Rachel, je t'avais entendu dire que quand tout le monde va danser, la planète va mieux se porter. Voilà.
Merci Sylvie. Merci Rachel. I think we can move on to the questions from the public, and there's actually one about stakeholders that I'm going to start with. So someone from UQAM is asking, what do you think are the challenges for dance professionals who are moving into different community and clinical settings after the research has demonstrated the benefits for that specific population? So I don't know who wants to start. You can either like raise your hand or like go for it and just unmute yourself.
Maybe I'll start. If I understand the question, first and foremost, you have the research, and I'm understanding that you're trained in whatever this approach is. But whenever you go into a community, there is also the aspect of working with that community, and every community is different. And I've gone into many long-term care facilities. There's a different culture of how it works and who's living there, and so I think that those are important considerations. I think also if your background isn't in research and you're speaking about the research, is knowing what you know and what you don't know. And so, you know, you can, if you've looked at the research and, you know, you want to reference it, it's just a matter of reaching out to the researchers to understand, you know, what can I say and what shouldn't I say, because I want to be accountable for what I'm saying as a dance professional and maybe not as a therapist or a clinician. So there's work that you can do. I would say the priorities would be, of course, to make sure you have experience training to work with whatever population you want to work with, learning about the community so that you can offer the best opportunity for that community. And then if you are not a researcher yourself, it's important that you understand what the research means and how you present it, because it might be relevant. You might want to use it as a case for why you should come to a community, but knowing what you should say and maybe not say about it. Those would be my initial thoughts.
Sylvie, Melissa, do you want to add anything?
Ça va.
You're muted, Melissa.
I think I agree with everything that Rachel's saying, and I think someone who, just drawing from the language of anthropology, do a little research on the organization, and I think, Rachel, you've been saying quite a lot about language, and also drawing on the language of social network, because you're going to have to speak their language and understand what are their missions and how can you kind of align, even with the evidence, why what you offer is really, really important. The other thing I can offer from social networks analysis is network. So look in your community, who are the people doing research, talk to them, reach out to them. I think, you know, Rachel and Sylvia and I all want to forward this, and Anna also, so reach out to us.
Thank you, Melissa. So there's another question. Someone is asking, Claire is asking, how many weeks have your project last with your community organizations from the start, like from when you start, like from the conception of the project until it ends? So I guess, Sylvie, if you want to start.
I can start. The shortest was probably 12 weeks, like a semester, university semester. But je suis en anglais, excusez-moi. Donc, le plus court des projets que j'ai fait, c'était la durée d'un semestre universitaire, environ 12 semaines. Mais je me souviens qu'un projet avec les troubles alimentaires, on devait finir à la fin décembre, mais lorsqu'on a réalisé, quand je dis qu'on travaille main dans la main, on a réalisé, les femmes ont dit, on n'arrête pas pour le temps des fêtes, c'est trop difficile, le rapport avec la nourriture durant le temps de Noël, c'est trop difficile. Donc, on a prolongé le projet. C'est ça, travailler main dans la main avec les gens. Donc, ça, c'était le plus court. Le plus long a duré 4 ans et 5 ans. C'est la pandémie qui a mis fin. À partir de la conception, ça a été presque 8 mois de mise en place. Et puis, en fait, ça, c'est un message. On sous-estime, on parle beaucoup de l'importance de travailler avec les communautés, de travailler en collaboration, les chercheurs quantitatifs, qualitatifs, les artistes, mais ça prend du temps. Et on minimise, on ne met jamais ça dans notre demande de subvention ou dans notre rapport avec les communautés. Allez-vous avoir une demi-heure à toutes les 3 semaines pour qu'on communique, pour qu'on fasse le point ensemble? Parce que c'est ça le succès, c'est se connecter avec les gens, parler. Puis après ça, je me tais pour donner la parole à mes... Mais on parlait de langage commun avec les femmes qui souffraient de fibromyalgie. Moi, je n'avais pas le goût d'appeler ça une maladie parce que je suis toujours dans l'optique qu'on se développe dans la vie. Mais pour ces personnes-là, sur le plan politique, c'était important d'appeler ça une maladie. avec un gros M majuscule, parce qu'il faut que ce soit reconnu comme ça pour que les employeurs, finalement, pour que les personnes puissent bénéficier de certains bénéfices sociaux quand ils quittent leur emploi. Donc, ça prend du temps de communication, ça prend du temps et ça, c'est sous-estimé. Voilà, je laisse la parole à mes collègues.
I think you captured it perfectly. That's why I think there's mute buttons were on, Sylvie, is the time. I would repeat what you said. I mean, the shortest one was an hour, and then the longest is still going. So yeah, years. Yeah, well put, Sylvie.
Thank you, Sylvie. Rachel, do you want to add anything or?
No, I would agree. We've had a lot of variability in length, and I would say as well that Sylvie, you really sort of captured it well.
I also want to say, Sylvie, I really liked like how you talked about it's not only about the length, but it's about like all the time you put like within those weeks, whether it's 12 weeks or like 4 years, but it's like that commitment to being there like for the next amount of time every week.
Maybe I'll just add one more thing, not to mention the participant relationships that you form, and that the time that it takes. You know, you really get to know people when in this dance studio, and you form relationships with people, and this also takes time that you don't never necessarily at the beginning imagine, but you know, it does. It is part of the experience. These are, you know, other human beings that you are connecting with, and so that's a big part of the process as well.
Je peux ajouter quelque chose?
Vas-y.
Pour moi, c'est important, on connecte avec ces gens-là parce qu'on vit sur un projet de 4-5 ans, on vit beaucoup avec ces gens-là. Donc, on s'attache sur le plan émotif avec ces gens-là. Mais pour moi, c'est important de délimiter mon action. C'est une action artistique. Je ne suis pas travailleur social, je ne suis pas psychologue, je suis une experte du mouvement, comme je disais. Je suis une experte de la dimension artistique. Donc, c'est super important. On travaille en milieu hospitalier, en milieu de rééducation, réadaptation, super important de vraiment circonscrire notre travail qui est complémentaire au travail des professionnels. Et de travailler en équipe, ça demande du temps et beaucoup de respect pour les uns envers les autres. En fait, c'est facile lorsque on essaie de mettre à contribution la richesse unique de chacun des partenaires.
Merci Sylvie, c'est une belle perspective. We have one last question. I don't know if you actually know how to answer. Someone asking if you know any specific adapted dance trainings in fibromyalgia. I'm actually chronic pain, cancer, or like long-term illnesses in France. So I don't think.
C'est un programme. La question est de savoir s'il existe des programmes de danse adaptés pour enseigner à toutes ces clientèles.
Oui, exactement. En France, par contre.
En France, il y a un programme à l'Université Côte d'Azur. C'est un programme pour enseigner la danse aux personnes âgées. Mais souvent, les personnes âgées ont des problèmes des physiques ou cognitifs. Donc, ce n'est pas un programme seulement sur la fibromyalgie ou quoi que ce soit, mais c'est un programme existant à l'Université de Côte d'Azur.
Merci, Sylvie. I don't think we have any other questions. If someone has like one very last minute question, it's your moment to go type it in. Otherwise, I think we can call it a night, and we're like on time actually. So thank you very much, Rachel, Melissa, and Sylvie, I think it was an extremely interesting conversation. I think everyone here agrees. And yeah, I don't have anything to add, honestly, because I think it's going to take time to just like, even though we discussed all these topics together before, like I think I still learned a lot, and like it's going to take a moment just to think about it and like appreciate all the knowledge and like the expertise you shared with us tonight. And I just want to mention to the participants, like this conversation is being recorded, so you can you'll be able to find the recording on our blog in a few weeks. There's not going to be simultaneous translation in the recording, so you're gonna have to watch it in the original language. This mix of French and English that is so typical of Montreal. And yeah, I think that's it for tonight.
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you. We hope we hear from you.
Yeah, please be in touch.
Yes, bye.
Take care.
And one last thing for the participants, we're going to send you a satisfaction survey. Please fill it in. Let us know what you thought about the event. Sorry. And yeah, merci beaucoup à tous les gens. Merci. Bonne soirée.